Good afternoon. I'm Emer. I'm head of memberships at the ISE. I'm hoping that you should all know me by this stage. However, I take care of all things membership. I'll put my email in the chat if you wanted to reach out. Please do. Today we are talking about ED&I, all things equity versus equality. And just on that note, it's really important that all aspects of ED&I are covered within the ISE. And since last year, we have worked with a group of members across the spectrum of our membership on equality, diversity, and inclusion. And these certain working groups have put together a series of webinars and insights and information to share with the early careers community. But today is a part of a series of webinars that's going to be happening throughout the year and in the lead up to our ED&I conference in November. So we have a variety of perspectives happening today from, HE and supplier and employers to cover data and practices and progress on this very important topic. Your host for today is Arnie Banoharan, and she has a wealth of knowledge in this particular topic and field. And I'll let Arnie introduce herself and hand it over to Arnie in a second, and she will take over and host the session for today. First things first, if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section, not the chat section, please, so that we can record them, as this webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you following the session today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Arnie to take you through as your host. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So yes, thank you so much for joining us today at this lunchtime webinar, which we've called Equality or Equity in Early Career Talent. And for our group in particular, this was a kind of important starter webinar that we thought would be useful for the membership, because we know that in this space, with an EDI in the UK, there's lots of different language used. Employers and universities are in lots of different spaces on where they are on their journeys with regards to this work. And so we thought this would be a useful starter webinar for this group to deliver that will then hopefully lead on to further activities, as Emma said, towards the EDI conference in November. So yes, my name's Arnie. I am Senior Associate Director for Careers and Employability at King's College London, but I'm also head up my own kind of boutique consultancy working in the space of inclusive practice, working with universities and other organisations to really look at equitable approaches and structural solutions to addressing any kinds of equity challenges. And so really the group of us today are sharing our different perspectives on how you can potentially understand this space within early career talent, but also how you can think about things moving forward as well. So to kick us off, we really wanted to kind of think about the why of EDI and starting here. So obviously you're joining us today, and that means you have an interest already, which is really excellent. And you may already be aware of the things that I'm going to kind of briefly summarize in this section. But I think it's always useful to start with the why. And when I do these kinds of sessions for organizations, I always start with a very simple kind of comic strip to help understand the different terminology, as you know, colleagues can be confused in this space. So inequality then. Unequal access to opportunities. And we've got this tree here, a really fruitful tree. There's lots for these two people here to access, but one is able to access the fruits of this tree really easily, whilst the other is like, oh, what can I do in this space? They're not able to access it. Equality then is that these two people have now been given the same tools to try and access the fruits of this tree. So evenly distributed tools and assistance. Now you can still see that one is able to access it much more than the other when equal and evenly distributed tools are provided. Then equity then is really when the two people are given the tools that they require to access the fruits of the tree. So different custom tools that are to identify and address the inequality there. Different things given to different people because they require different things to access the fruits of the tree. And then justice, or indeed the systemic solution here, is really fixing the system. So the issue was that the tree was bent in one direction, and therefore fixing that situation will allow for equal access to both tools and opportunities. So a super simple way of thinking about these different terms. And really then when we look at this, what we really want to focus on in this session is that when it's a question between equality and equity, we should all be actually taking an equitable approach. And ideally, that equity will be at a structural and systemic level. So these last two comic slides here, so the equity and the justice piece, is what all organizations should be striving towards. And so when I do this work with universities in particular, but it especially also applies to all sorts of other employers as well, that you can think about inclusive practice then in two different ways. And the equity piece is really that individual level. I've said here supporting students, but really in the context of graduates here from marginalized backgrounds or underrepresented groups within your sectors, to really then think about this. So apologies, this is in the context of learning and teaching, but it can be applied from an individual level from the early career talent space. And then the second level of that is then the structural and systemic approach, where we're looking at processes, strategies, looking at where in our processes there may be challenges and addressing it from that perspective. And in the learning and teaching space, I call this being inclusive by design. But these three theories that underpin this, universal design, culturally responsive practice, and a capability approach, apply in the early talent career space as well. So the why of EDI for employers then, and you probably already know and realize this, but everyone always starts with our legal obligations. And of course, there is the Equality Act 2010, which outlines protected characteristics and ensuring that all employers do kind of put in the relevant measures to ensure that everyone is able to access employment, but also do the best they can be in that space as well. So that's the very base level, I will say. And I think it's unfortunate that lots of our conversations kind of stop in this space, but because there's been loads of research that really shares how there's loads of business benefits to focusing on EDI. So I wanted to just cover a few of those really quickly right now. So of course, attracting more diverse talent, that means different perspectives coming into the organization that will help us understand our customers and clients in a different kind of way. So back in the heyday of doing unconscious bias trainings, we would talk about the fact that when Google were developing the first photo apps, they were always thinking of it from a right-handed user perspective because, hey, everyone on their team was right-handed. But actually, when it was applied to that left-handed situation, we saw how that didn't work. And so really having just even that simple notion of diversity showcases how it ultimately supports our users, clients, and customers when it comes to the things that we are providing. It also, of course, encourages greater innovation and creativity, problem solving, and the creation of different kinds of products and services as well. Improving retention and reducing the costs associated with high turnover. I know this is really important, especially in the kind of difficult financial climates that we're facing in the various different sectors at the moment. And then really kind of thinking it from this perspective of also increasing employee satisfaction and productivity. If the staff workforce feel that they have good well-being supporting them, that the organization cares about their progression, and that everyone is treated fairly and equitably, well, actually, you're going to have greater productivity from that team. And then lastly, but not least, of course, that all leads to increased business revenue. So the why for EDI, yes, there are legal obligations associated with it, but I think more importantly, there are also kind of just strategic and business outputs that are really tangible from focusing on this work as well. So that's it from me for a really quick kind of overview from that perspective. And I'm going to now pass on to our crack team of colleagues in the group who are going to overview and explore the diversity of potential early career talent and the challenges that they might be facing. So over to Anna, Katie, and Felicity.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm going to take the first slide. Thank you, Arnie. I'm Head of Careers and Employment at the University of Hertfordshire. And one of the things we often get asked by employer partners in particular is for an overview of the makeup of our students, the diversity that we have within the institution. And of course, that's very different depending on the different institutions and perhaps some of the subjects that are covered in those universities. But there is an awful lot of information available about higher education data in the UK. I've just pulled out a summary of some of the things that I thought might be particularly relevant to this particular webinar. But this information comes from HESA, the Higher Education Statistics Agency, that collates data from all UK universities. There's always a bit of a lag with that because they're pulling together such big amounts of data in terms of enrolments. So this particular data set is the most recent available, and it is from 21-22, the academic year. And things do change over time, but I think generally speaking, this will give us a good overview of the kind of diversity that we see within higher education. So first of all, this is all different programs, different levels, different subjects. Overall, 57% females. So you will see, just like some employer contacts who have different diversity outreach schemes to try and attract more diverse talent pipeline within business. Universities as well do have outreach programs and really try to address some of these gaps and differences that we see in terms of recruitment. 16% of students declared some kind of disability, but also we can see in that next point down that from that 16%, actually 61% of those conditions that were declared were some kind of learning difficulty or a mental health condition. Just under 20% of full-time first degree entrants, so that's your kind of full-time, more traditional undergraduate type degree, were eligible for free school meals. So that tends to be a measure that's used quite a lot, looking at perhaps socio-economic disadvantage within the UK in particular. And just under half of UK domiciled full-time undergraduates had at least one parent who had already attended higher education qualification. And my colleague Katie is going to talk a little bit more about why that makes a difference and why that's important in terms of some of the challenges that students might face. So again, for this UK full-time first degree entrants, for those that were still dependent on parental income, so those that were kind of coming from the family home into university directly, got just under 41% who reported a household income of £25,000 or under. So again, a kind of a measure that we tend to see used within the sector to give us a sense of perhaps some of the backgrounds of these students. And we also have a breakdown there of ethnicity within the student population. Just to give a little bit of context as well, I was having a look at the latest census from 2021, which was just looking at England and Wales in particular for the data that was collated. But of that, we saw that there were 82% of people declaring as white, 4% black, and 9% Asian. So actually, in terms of some of the diversity that we're seeing coming through into higher education, there's a bit of a difference there and perhaps more diverse in the general population. And we do still see that UK domiciled, so that's students that usually live in the UK when they start at university and make up the largest proportion of those enrolments, as you might expect. But we have, of course, seen a decline in EU enrolment numbers since Brexit, and colleagues on the call might be aware as well that we are seeing more non-EU or international enrolments that had risen by 32% in this particular academic year, and I think it's safe to say have risen again. Of course, lots of change that can come depending on different policies, and there's certainly a lot in the media at the moment and in government looking at this particular group. So that can change over time. But out of the top sort of non-EU countries that we tend to see enrolments from at the moment, we have China, India, Nigeria, the US, Bangladesh, Malaysia, the UAE, and Saudi currently. So that's just a quick overview of some of the headlines. Like I say, you can go on the HESA website to see a lot more in-depth information if you're looking at any particular groups in particular. And my colleague Katie now will talk about why some of this data is important in terms of what our students will be facing.
Thank you, Anna. So I'm Katie Finnemore. I'm a careers and employability consultant at the University of Plymouth, and I work with business school students, international students, postgraduate students, and women students as well. These are some of the key challenges that we are seeing students facing, and this is from a national perspective as well as locally. We're very much seeing if students are first in their family to come to university, we know that that can affect them through a lack or reduced social and cultural capital. And what we mean by that is that students who have experienced a parent going to university, their parents have an understanding of what that university experience is like. And so they're in a better position to support their offspring with that experience and the transition into that experience. And also it means they can support it better, but they may well also have gone on to have more professional level jobs and better networks, which means that they can potentially connect their children to opportunities and even just getting to build their network and understanding what it's like to meet different people from different backgrounds. And even hearing, your parents talking about work on a daily basis can be very different. So that's one of the challenges. We know that increasingly students are having multiple responsibilities. So especially in the current economic situation, we're seeing a lot of students who are feeling like they have to take up a part-time position in the workplace in order to support their university experience. And this means that it's taking up their time and their energy that they might be able to use elsewhere. And for example, if we're running events outside of the timetabled sessions that they have to go along to, such as employers coming to campus, for example, to talk about the opportunities available with them, they can't always afford to come to those if they're, or if the opportunity cost is not being able to go to their part-time job. Cost of living crisis, so that's very much one way we're seeing that reflected, is this increase in students who are having to rely on part-time work, but also it means that there may be more students commuting and going back home and actually having to take that travel time into account to come to university and the costs of that as well. So there might be days where they literally just can't afford to do it and decide not to come. And I think we're all aware of this growing mental health crisis that is evident in young people. And they all take a toll on what energy and motivation students have to be able to engage with universities and extracurricular activities. On the lack of representation side, we are very much seeing an increase in loneliness in students. I think the most recent thing I read was around 30% of students reporting loneliness. And so actually finding that fitting in is a struggle, and it's also a high priority. And it feels like in this, more connected world than ever, supposedly, students are feeling increasingly isolated and struggling perhaps to find people who share similarities that they can connect with and relate to. And again, it's all about this extra stress and just making it a bit harder for students to settle in during their university experience. On top of that, we may be seeing students who are care experienced, who are estranged from their parents and so don't have any kind of network or support at home. We're seeing refugees, travelling communities, service children, so who have grown up with a parent in the armed forces and may have had to move around a lot, and that may have disrupted their schooling experience. These are all challenges, again, that they're bringing to university, and it's just part of their story, but it affects where they start, and again, potentially that social and cultural capital when they do get here. And then I think the societal barriers are probably the things we're most familiar with in the context of equality and equity. And those are things like race, gender, and disability. So hopefully that's a useful introduction to those challenges. And I will hand over to Felicity for the next slide.
Thank you very much. So my name is Felicity Holstead. I'm the founder of Good Work, and we're a nonprofit working with employers to create fairer opportunities for young people from marginalised communities. A bit of context as to what I'm going to talk about today. So we work with 18 to 25-year-olds who have left education and are struggling to get their careers started, the vast majority of whom haven't got a university degree, and they might be looking at going into apprenticeship opportunities or kind of straight into long-term employment, long-term roles. Why does this matter? Why is this relevant here? So there is a 20% gap between young people from the lowest socioeconomic backgrounds accessing higher education and the rest of the population. And this group are also 10% more likely to drop out of university and not complete their degree. So it's always really worth reflecting when we run graduate programs about the communities that we are potentially excluding simply by virtue of running programs that are only accessible to those who've maybe been to university and got that degree. And this is also really true in a lot of the outreach opportunities that we see as well, where there are fantastic, summer internship programs, for example, but that they are only available to those who are currently enrolled in an undergraduate course. So I thought one of the ways I could bring this to life a little bit more and talk about the diversity of the young people that we work with is to share a little bit of a snapshot from our program that we run at Good Work. Now, I'll heavily caveat this and say that this is not government data, but one of the real challenges that we see is that actually there's very little research on the group of young people that we talk about. So we're not just talking about the NEET population, so those who are perhaps long-term unemployed or out of educational training, but we also come across a huge number of young people who are what we would define as underemployed. So young people who are really keen to, who are actively applying to great opportunities with big employers, to apprenticeships, for example, and just simply not making it through the application process. We are London-based, so obviously there is an element to which this data is slightly skewed, but it is really important just to reflect on just how overrepresented certain communities are. So the vast majority of young people we work with on our programs are people of colour. We have a very high proportion of young people who come to us who have a disability, who were free school meals eligible, or from areas of high deprivation. We tend to also see female candidates slightly overrepresented, and we also see relatively high proportions too of those who've experienced homelessness, who are care experienced, or who have been through the refugee or asylum seeker process. And it's just to really emphasize the real intersectionality of the group of young people that organizations like mine are supporting, and how challenging it can be for those young people without that additional support to really get through open recruitment processes. In terms of that piece around the fact that we are based in London, I think something we're seeing a lot of employers talk about as well at the moment is that opportunity gap between London and the rest of the UK, and really moving kind of outreach programs to other areas. I definitely don't discourage this because the problem exists everywhere, but actually the data doesn't suggest that the problem has been solved in London. There's a really brilliant Oliver Wyman report called One City, Two Worlds, which is from a couple of years ago, which actually highlighted that young people from the lowest socioeconomic backgrounds in London have only a 17%, that's 17, chance of ever holding a professional job, compared to over 30% nationally. So actually, while academic outcomes have massively increased across the capital in terms of young people, massively improved, sorry, in terms of young people coming out of education with better GCSEs and A-levels, and the investment in education in London has seen some really strong outcomes, is that translating into long-term job opportunities for those same young people? It would appear that potentially it isn't, and I think it's really worth reflecting on that. And I think just before I kind of pass over to start the panel, it's really, really key to remember that this is a pool of candidates who are actively coming to organisations like mine and asking us for help to navigate the jobs market. They are motivated, they have plenty of potential, but then they're not getting anywhere when they apply in open competition. And yet when we're able to support them, they tend to go on to be really successful. And we often hear from employers that these candidates aren't out there, or that they're not applying for their roles. And the information that we have really suggests that this isn't true. So what we need to do is really think about, what are the inclusive hiring strategies, and also, are we sourcing those candidates from the right places? So not just doing outreach in schools and universities, but also doing outreach in job centres through local community groups as well, to really ensure that everybody is getting a fair shot at accessing fantastic early career opportunities. I'm now, I think, going to hand back to Arani as we move into the Q&A session. Arani, you're on mute, I think.
I know, it has to happen once, guys. It has to happen once in a webinar. Okay, so yes, we're going to actually move on to a small kind of panel point where colleagues are going to talk a little bit about developing inclusive strategies. And so we've got Becky, Claire, and of course Felicity, who's just spoken, joining us for this. So kicking us, back, there we go. So colleagues, shall I stop sharing then if it's nice to see everyone, I think, when we do that. So let me go ahead and stop sharing. And I wondered whether you wanted to say a few words first from your different contexts before we open up to the question and answer section. So shall we start with Becky?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone, and nice to see you all today. So my name is Becky. I work for Deloitte. So I've been at Deloitte for about 2 years now, but prior to that, I was at Amberjack for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was at npower, all in the early careers space. So I've got about 10 years of experience in the sector. So like I said, been at Deloitte for 2 years, and I look after sort of the operational area within Deloitte. So it's all of the operational recruitment that I actually oversee. Looking after the audit and the tax businesses mostly, but also working on sort of all of our centralised projects that we've got going on, kind of early careers as a whole. We are quite a huge early careers function, as you can imagine. So we're talking sort of 2,000 plus hires that we make each year across, that's across interns, IPs, graduates and apprentices. So huge volumes that we're working with, and we're a big team of about 30 people in our early careers team. So like I said, I look after kind of one half of the operational side of that. So the D&I piece is something we're obviously really passionate about at Deloitte, being such a huge employer. It's certainly kind of high up there on the agenda. And we've really made strides over the last few years to kind of look at each part of our process, so attraction, assessment, sort of, strategic pieces that we can do in this space. So really happy to talk through any of those in kind of more detail, but I think if I just give you a bit of a flavour of some of the things that we're doing. So one of the big things that we've done this year is really increase our Spring into Deloitte programme. So that's our first year programme that we offer for university students in their first year. They come in the spring for the 2-day programme, and this year we've made it paid for the first time, which is amazing, because obviously that opens up for certainly social mobility students or students that would struggle to come down to London for 2 days, etc. And we've increased that as well from 200 places to 400 places. What's really great about our spring programme is that it is entirely diversity kind of focused. So what we do is we run multiple programmes, but with a specific focus on females. So females in audit, females in tax, Black heritage and audit, etc. So what it allows us to do is really target those candidates who may, not be as fortunate in the later stages of the process. So, for example, in the graduate programme, if you wait until the 3rd year to get these people in, it becomes much harder to then try and get those candidates through the process. So what we're really trying to do is focus on those spring programmes so we can get the diverse talent as early as possible. And we've also reduced barriers to then getting those candidates onto our summer internships and our industrial placements this year. So assuming they go onto that 2-day programme and perform well, we then offer them a direct route into our summer internship for the following year. So again, hopefully then getting kind of the numbers that we want to be seeing in our graduate cohorts, which have previously been very hard to hit. I'm sure many employers on the call will have the same challenges that we do around the business wanting targets or setting targets, diversity targets, which is always a real challenge. Of course, female targets are normally 50%, but we know that that's not necessarily what you see applying in terms of things like accountancy and finance. So these early programs really help us to reach out to those diverse talent early on. I'll leave it there. There's lots of other stuff that we do. Happy to take questions in terms of what we do in assessment, what we do in attraction, but I'll let Claire introduce herself and not steal all the thunder.
Thanks, Becky. Yes, my name's Claire Bainan. I'm the Talent Acquisition Marketing Manager for Enterprise Mobility. Like Becky, I didn't have previous experience in different organisations. I actually started on their graduate programme 20 plus years ago. And that's quite unique about Enterprise, is that really it's very much a promote from within culture. So when we talk about diversity, you know, we have to make sure we bring that bench in early, because it's about progressing. You know, it's one thing to get them in, but it's also making sure they get on. And you know, we have to really make sure that happens, because our intake today will be our future senior leaders in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. So yeah, so I started on the grad scheme. And my role is I look after the marketing team for Enterprise. So I have a team who are out on campus building relationships with our biggest referring universities. In fact, we work with lots of different universities, and also job centres. And, you know, we spoke about that, Felicity, earlier, also colleges, because we have lots of different roles within the organisation. Only, you know, we do have a graduate programme, which actually we have opened up parts to non-grads. So quite interested to hear a little bit more, and maybe take our conversation offline, Felicity, about the students you're interacting with. So yeah, we have big hiring numbers too. So around about, you know, 1,600 grads, and then we have placements on top. We have apprenticeships. So really diverse pathways coming in, entry to our different programs. So yes, I mean, I'm happy to go on and talk a little bit more, Arani, about what we do, or I don't know whether you had any specific questions.
That's great. Felicity, any last things that you wanted to add in on the panel side? I know you had a chance to share a little bit. Was there anything further you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I can see that there are definitely some questions and things coming in, and I think I've probably given enough upfront context. So yeah, happy to move to the panel of questions and things. Yeah, now.
Yeah. Okay, so we have Chris from University of West of England, which is in Bristol, who's come in with a couple of questions, and I wonder whether you may or may not be able to answer these questions. But the first one is really he's interested to hear about any university employer partnerships that look to address these challenges that we've sort of discussed. And so even actually, Claire and Becky, you've sort of answered it a little bit with regards to the things that you spoke about. So for example, he said here that currently looking to work with employer partners to move from disability confidence scheme level 1 to level 2, for example. Any thoughts on this question here?
I'll maybe start off. We're actually, we've done some real good work to become a disability confident leader as an employer. And I think that's down to some of the programs that we're running. And I'll give one example. We've got a Blind in Business event, Insight Day, at our head offices coming up in the summer. And so we just make sure that we are, I think insights into your organisation are really valuable. And it's also not easy sometimes to set that up, because there is a cost implication, and obviously we will make sure we cover reimbursement for costs for students to come into our offices. But I think that's just like one example, I guess, of just opening your doors to let students in to sort of experience the workplace and ensure they feel it's inclusive and they feel confident about applying to your organisation, because yeah, that's really you know, a challenge. We also work heavily with outside career fairs at universities. Really important for us. We work with the WP an access cohort of students at universities. In fact, we probably target and work with those students a lot more than any other sort of cohort of students, which we know we will have access then to students that are coming from backgrounds who have maybe additional barriers that they need support. And we work with those students to really ensure that we're looking at those invisible barriers and identifying ways that we can break those down. And really, it's about coaching and developing students to be the best version they can be during that interview process. And when we're talking about equity, you know, it's not treating every candidate the same way, but actually, how do we ensure that we're giving students the opportunity, particularly if they're neurodiverse, to access maybe questions ahead of the interview? How do we ensure that we coach our candidates a little bit through the process? And we do offer that, in fact, to all our applicants. weekly, where every applicant can have an opportunity to jump in on one of our coaching sessions. You know, we're not here to catch you out. We're here to support our students to be the best version of themselves. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an insight of some of the things that we do.
Yeah, thank you for that, Claire. And I think it shows how actually, when we think about it from this perspective as well, you're helping everybody. So when we think about how we support those who are underrepresented in various employers or sectors, it's of course about enabling them to be the best version of themselves so that they can showcase their potential in these different recruitment environments, so that actually employers can kind of reap the benefits of that as well. But it helps everybody in that process. So this is not necessarily just about doing bespoke activities for bespoke groups, but actually thinking about it. That's where that kind of structural or systemic approach to inclusion and inclusive practice kind of comes into play as well. So thank you for that. Becky, anything further you wanted to add for that particular question?
Yeah, so it's sort of related, I suppose, in terms of sort of university partnerships or partnerships in general, I would say, is what we look at. So we do look to work with not necessarily, we do work with universities, but in terms of like media partnerships, we are always looking for those that will have you know, an audience of say 50+% female, for example. But we do events, and we'll try and target events like STEM, you know, STEM only events, female focused events when we're, you know, planning our campaign for the season. You know, Deloitte are huge. We partner with most universities, so we do a lot of university partnerships across the board anyway, not specifically for a diversity focus, but obviously for a general attraction focus. But I think in the diversity space, we're always looking to, you know, partner with those that will have the percentages of, you know, high percentage of diverse audiences, who run specific women focused events as an example. And we're always looking to, we work with what we call campus ambassadors, so students who are on campus who can kind of connect us with maybe, as an example, female focused societies, to help obviously get the message across. In terms of the disability confidence piece, it's not something that I'm personally as familiar with. I know we have done a lot of work internally as Deloitte to try and get our disability confidence level up. So we are looking, you know, there is stuff going on. It's not my area of expertise, unfortunately, but happy to try and, you know, if it's of interest to anyone, I can go away and look into that in terms of what we've done in that space.
So thank you so much. And we've got a few questions here, so let's try and get through as many as we can. Next question then, do you have any insight into why candidates from underrepresented groups are unsuccessful at the point of application?
Yeah.
Who would like to kick off?
You take it, go for it.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this one. So I think a lot of it comes down to process. So, and I think it can happen, it can be affected on both sides. So some of it is about, you know, what are we looking for? And I often say, you know, things like CVs for entry-level roles often are indicators of privilege more than anything else, right? That work experience. How did you secure it? Was it paid? That really impressive university degree is a huge achievement. But again, when you put it into context, is it more impressive and does it make you a better qualified candidate than somebody who maybe has a less prestigious degree? So some of it is about, you know, what are we looking for as employers at those early stages? And then it's also about how we support people through the process. So I'm really glad that Claire mentioned a few of the things that she did around things like providing interview questions in advance. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about because it's something that we see as being really helpful across the board for candidates who perhaps are feeling really nervous, feel like it might be, you know, they've got less experience, they've got fewer people able to help them prepare for job interviews. We really don't see it affecting outcomes in terms of that idea or that fear that some employers have that everyone's going to come in and do brilliantly as a result. What we actually see is that those who really care and really want it and have the ability to do well will come in and do really well, and that actually that you will get a much more kind of level playing field from a diversity perspective there as well. So it's really thinking about that kind of process. And I also think, just going back as well to the subject of the kind of what we're looking for, sometimes it's about polish as well. It's about that idea of who is a good fit and really getting employers to kind of move away from looking for that kind of culture fit expectation of what somebody is going to dress like, behave like, if it's an online interview, are we judging people even subconsciously for their background or the fact that they don't have a laptop that's on a steady surface or that their internet might have cut out? We see huge amounts of digital poverty in the work that we do. And I think that assumption a lot of people have, that actually doing things online is more accessible and inclusive, is not always the case. And certainly with young people from lower socioeconomic groups, it's often not the case. And so giving people options in those processes can be really helpful as well. That's just a few thoughts from me, but I'm sure Becky and Claire may also have things to add there.
Shall I go, Claire? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely agree with everything Felicity said, and I think we're certainly making strides in those spaces. We've recently got rid of our GCSE and A-level requirement for our graduates. We're still clinging on to the 2-1, unfortunately. Hopefully we'll get rid of it eventually. But for now, we have at least got rid of the minimum entry requirements for the lower grades. There's a lot of research we've done to suggest that it's just, it doesn't necessarily predict performance in the role. So it's quite a simple thing that employers can do, is to reduce the minimum entry criteria. We've also completely removed, we've never had CV submission. Actually, I think across my whole 10 years in early careers, it's a long time since I've seen sort of CV submissions for early careers. I think application form, but actually moving away from scoring an application form is definitely the way forward. Our application process is very much a basic application form, i.e. collect, the personal details required. We do collect information on grade and university, but it's purely for reporting purposes. And ultimately, what we're assessing candidates on is their ability to perform in the tests that we put them through. So we've got a 3-stage process, and it is solely done on the score that they get in those tests. Which again, like Felicity was saying, it means that you're putting people kind of at a level playing field. You're not looking through fine-tuned answers to score them on, or judging them based on what university they came from or anything like that. So I think that really helps to initially level the playing field. We do see something really interesting, and it'd be interesting, Claire, if you find the same thing, as the cognitive tests. You often find that Black heritage students perform worse in the cognitive tests, specifically the numerical ones. And this is something that we're working really closely with our assessment provider on, to kind of understand, why that is the case. The information we're getting at the moment is that it's a real societal issue. And so it's really hard one for kind of the assessment world or for, Deloitte to tackle. But that is something that we've seen, that Black heritage candidates struggle on these tests. So I think one sort of practical thing that employers can do, especially if numeracy isn't absolutely fundamental for the job, removing those cognitive tests is an absolutely fundamental thing to do. Unfortunately, in the world of audit and tax, where I work, we do absolutely have to have those numerical tests in. We've done a lot of research that suggests that they do genuinely go on to predict performance of success in professional qualifications. But where I used to work, where it was more of a commercial scheme, marketing scheme, etc., I would say get rid of your numerical reasoning tests, because they really can cause adverse impact. Throughout our process, we also do, we're really sort of good at reporting kind of the candidates' percentages as they come through the process. So if we're seeing 40% of females apply at the top end, you would expect to see 40% of females getting jobs at the other end. So again, another practical thing to do is to make sure you're always monitoring the reporting at each stage, to check that you've not got adverse impact in the process. And it might not just be adverse impact on the actual performance of the test, but actually are candidates from various groups more likely to withdraw than other candidates, for example. So again, lots of research out there to suggest that females apply later, or that females are more likely to take their time completing a test. So as soon as you start putting kind of barriers in, like, hard deadlines where you're not giving them much time to complete, those sorts of things can negatively impact certain groups. So we're very hot on kind of making sure that our, if it's 40% top end, 40% bottom end, that should show you that you've not got any issues in your process. Of course, if that's not the case, if you're seeing 40% of females apply at the top end, but you're only getting 20% at offer, there's something going wrong in your process. And that's where we work with kind of external providers to tweak things and change things and put in additional helping hands for those candidates to make sure that we're giving that level playing field. Like Claire, we do coaching calls, and we've also introduced what we call a preparation hub this year, which is sort of a nice online website which helps candidates really feel prepared for these tests that we're going to put them through. So we're kind of doing everything we can to level the playing field so that everyone has that same access to the opportunity. Go on,
I
Claire.
think that's really great. And I think what your answers showcase there is how data is so important, right? Like looking at that data and understanding it at each point in the process is so important. And that's how you can see where the challenge or the issue may be that needs to be addressed. So I think that's really great and really thorough kind of ideas and that you've shared there as well.
Yeah.
We've got a question here that says, are you worried about your work through the work of trying to attract diverse talent, that you're also attracting other candidates as well? And if so, how do you try to manage this? Who'd like to take that on?
Not sure I understand the question. So is that?
As in, I think maybe it's in relation to attracting the usual candidates. So in different things that you're doing that may be supported, there to support those who are underrepresented in applications and then within your organization, are they also just attracting the usual candidates as well?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah, I understand. I think just going back to Becky's point as well, data is super important. And also, I think the message there is review what you do and why you do it. And is it getting you to your goal?
That's right.
Because, sometimes you might have a process in place, like you mentioned, the numeracy tests, and actually, why do we do those? And is it creating another barrier that we see no difference if we remove that test? In terms of attracting all candidates, I mean, our programme is really broad. We take all degree disciplines onto our management training programme. We don't ask for any specific attainment level. We have opportunities across the country. So that's really helpful for students not having to relocate for a graduate role, and they can stay in their hometown if that's going to be better for them. So I think that's seen as quite attractive. And we don't have any sort of psychometric numeracy tests. And actually, we even removed the assessment centre during our probably about 3 years ago, because the assessment centre was really, although we did reimburse for travel and we had equity in mind throughout, it really became, by the point they came to our assessment centre, they were already pretty much hired, and it was really more of an exercise for us to showcase our culture as an organisation, which we've now been able to do in a different way. So I think in terms of attraction, we are bringing in all candidates, but it's just making sure that we are really mindful of those students that may see those or potential additional barriers, and how do we access those students that have that part-time job, that can't attend the career fair because they haven't got the time, and that's really how we've been mindful in our talent attraction strategy. So one example is we do work and we have a real focus on working with faculties outside the business school. So we work with the business schools, but also social science, humanities, those subjects that may be highly female populated, maybe we see maybe not as high graduate outcomes in some particular faculties, and how do we work with those students to open their minds to actually different career paths and opportunities that would be open to them. So I think sometimes getting into those, it's not easy and it takes a lot of time, but essentially getting in front of students that would not have maybe even thought to come and look at us as an employer, as a graduate employer. So another strategy we've implemented over the last year has been our fast track interviews. So again, trying to remove that barrier of that worry of, well, if I apply, am I going to get anywhere? It's a big organisation. It's really trying to personalise that approach. And when we're on campus, getting to know the students, sitting down with them, chatting to them, finding out about them. And we're actually seeing more women actually liking that approach, where we're really kind of trying to really break those barriers and help with their confidence, and really show that we are just people who are really friendly and just want to get to know you, and trying to use that as approach to bring people through our recruitment process. So there's maybe some different examples that we've been doing.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'll move on to the next question just because there's quite a few there, and let's try and cover them. So another question then is, we've spoken a lot about kind of social mobility, neurodiversity, and the focus generally within EDI space, I guess, has been in these areas this year. What are the challenges and potential solutions in attracting and supporting candidates who may be from low socioeconomic backgrounds or are neurodiverse? Who would like to start?
happy to pick up on that one. Obviously, a lot of the work I do is around social mobility, but actually something when we were talking about the data earlier on in the session that I didn't highlight from within the disability data that we have is that we see neurodivergent young people really overrepresented in our work. And as a neurodivergent person myself as well, it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about and reflecting on, particularly when it comes to my own kind of early career experience, having started on a corporate grad scheme a few years ago. In terms of those particular areas and the kind of both attraction and also kind of support strategies, I think a few of these things have been touched on already. Financial inclusion is so important. That doesn't just come down to things like access to digital devices. Obviously, we've talked about things like giving people financial support in order to attend in-person interviews and sessions. Also thinking about things like, do they have anything to wear that they're going to feel comfortable in? Are we able to either support them with that or make it really clear that that's not a requirement? And, you know, I know a lot of organizations offer things like joining bonuses as part of graduate schemes, but if that joining bonus doesn't actually get paid until 4 weeks in, then that's not necessarily going to help the young person who is genuinely concerned about their ability perhaps to pay for the train to get into work for their first month. So really just thinking about, you know, all of the different areas and the processes and things that people can put in place, because often, and I think we see this with young people we work with, all they need is an advocate. If we're able to kind of give somebody a call and say, hey, this is a problem that somebody's facing, the answer is often, yeah, of course we can do something about that. But without us saying, you need to ask for that support, the young people don't do it. And we see that with neurodiversity too. So we see neurodivergent young people frequently feeling like they shouldn't disclose that they are neurodivergent in the process, even when they are encouraged to. And they shouldn't ask for any adjustments because they feel like they're going to be discriminated against. Ways that you can support with that. So one of the things I really love seeing is when you give people space to ask for adjustments, giving some examples of adjustments that you can make or that you've made in other sets of circumstances. I know for some people you might be worried and think, oh, but then everyone's going to ask for that. To a certain extent, if it's something like giving interview questions in advance, wonderful. Give everybody interview questions in advance would be my answer. But actually, at the same time, I think what we see is that abuse of things like that is actually fairly uncommon. And actually what it does do is empower people to think, oh, this is really helpful. It could also be part of an outreach initiative as well. So something that you could do as part of your outreach is share some ways that you've adapted and helped people who are from underrepresented communities or maybe have a disability to feel more able to engage with your processes, or here are some of the adjustments that we make. Because we also see young people quite often say things like, I've been asked if I want any adjustments, but I don't know what I need because I've not worked in an office before. So just making sure you're asking all the time, it's part of your line manager training, and you're just giving people kind of multiple opportunities to ask for that extra support would be my kind of top advice. But I'll pause there in case I'm sure others have things to add as well.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And yeah, I think we definitely take the assumptive approach when we're going through the interview process and saying, please let us know what adjustments you need, irrespective of whether a student's disclosed or not. What do you need to be successful for the next stage of the process? But I think showcasing examples and maybe case studies of what you have done with those candidates makes them, because sometimes, like you say, Felicity, they don't know what they need. And sometimes just sort of exploring and sharing some of what we've done in the past is really helpful to students. We also have a charitable foundation at Enterprise, so we can donate charitable donations to universities, and we've seen some really lovely examples of working wardrobes that we've supported at different universities, one of which recently at Nottingham Trent University, which is open to students who have graduated up to 3 years after they finish university. So again, I think, you know, there is some fantastic examples in education of ways that we're supporting students as they're transitioning into the world of work. But again, I think that's a really good point, Felicity, on workwear. We do clothing vouchers on your first day, but then they need the clothing to get to their, you know, maybe their interview or their first day on the job. So yeah, some great examples there.
I think also a really great point here is that to say that with neurodivergence as well, like so many people are undiagnosed basically. So reviewing processes so that they are actually at their core inclusive of those who may be neurodivergent is really important, because you'll still be losing candidates even if they are unaware. I was diagnosed at 22 with a specific learning difference. You know, many of us are actually diagnosed later in adulthood, and therefore you're still losing out on the kind of great potential candidates that could be kind of working through into the organization. And I think why it has taken such a big part of the EDI kind of landscape in the past year is because we're seeing how actually more and more people are being diagnosed as adults, rather than thinking about it just as kind of the kind of narrow way we've been thinking about neurodiversity in the past, perhaps. So next question then, what are we seeing happening to change the system once recruited? I think a really important question, because we've focused a lot here around attraction and recruitment. But of course, previous research has also shown that progression into those bigger organizations are easier for those from middle-class backgrounds. And we may see actually also higher attrition rates amongst those who are underrepresented if we're not looking at that further. So what's happening that you can kind of share?
I think certainly in Deloitte, there's just been a big focus on the policies that we have once someone's in. So, you know, female-friendly policies, maternity leave, paternity leave, for example, you know, return to work, flexible working. There's a big piece, especially since COVID. There's been a lot more ability for people to work flexibly and work from home, which obviously tends to, you know, help underrepresented groups. So generally, I'd say that's where our focus has been, is just making sure that once people are in, our policies are fair. That's probably all I would say in terms of what I've got the knowledge on. Obviously, where I sit in the recruitment world, I'm not as familiar with what we do kind of in our HR world, but certainly policies and well-being is something that we've been focusing on in Deloitte.
Yeah, I'm just going to add from our perspective. I mean, we're quite fortunate in the sense that, you know, your manager has been in your shoes when you start. So because of that promote from within culture, so that's really nice that they're coming in and they're supported by a team that have started and been in that management training role. I think talking about sort of looking at policies and looking at equitable processes that we have, it's a big project for us. We have a D&I council here that I'm part of in the UK, and every country has a council and each region has a council, which is led by our managing director. And we are looking at different parts of our business internally and asking and sitting and asking, is this equitable? How do we make this more equitable? That could be an internal promotion. You know, do some prepare more than others because of the network they have around them? Is it our policies? You know, is it the company car scheme when you're on maternity leave? Is that equitable? Does it give people the best opportunity to be successful? So we've really stripped it back internally to review what we do. You know, I think that's really, really important, and that's an ongoing piece, and that's really, you know, speaking to our employees, asking them how they feel and what more we can do to make it a better place to work. So I think that's an ongoing sort of process, but I think it's to show that our MD is leading a team in the UK around equity is great, and shows kind of how important it is.
Absolutely. And it's also why this question around equitable and inclusive approaches is not just a recruitment attraction agenda within an organization. It should be around that whole kind of staff life cycle. And really, employers can learn so much from the university experience, where for 25 years we focus on access. And it's only now we're saying, hey, we should probably think about the outcomes as well, and what's happening in the in-between. And I think it's really important that any organization that is wanting to see that change looks at it from that whole kind of staff cycle, life cycle perspective, rather than just like the getting in aspect. We want them to get on as well when they're here. So thank you for that. So we have a question here, which I think is an interesting one. I have my thoughts on it, but so Becky is wondering how you target those specific groups that you've mentioned without crossing over the line of positive discrimination.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. And it comes back to, I think someone asked a question earlier around how do you know, what do you do because you're going to attract everyone? And the reality is you do attract everyone. You can't stop anyone applying. So actually in our female-focused, you know, let's say female-focused audits bring into Deloitte, you might get males applying, and we wouldn't discriminate those in the process. The reality is, when you call it, you know, women in audit, it's much more likely to attract females. And it goes back to what I was saying about the percentages thing. If you get 70% of females apply, because they should all come through the process at the same rate because of the fair process, you should then see 70% get the role. So I think it's just around, for us, you know, how we title the jobs, how we write the job descriptions to make sure they're, you know, female friendly, but not putting off other people, imagery, etc. So it's attracting the diverse group that we do want, because ultimately those are the ones who we then want to help bolster our future grad population. But we absolutely wouldn't stop anyone from applying, because that's when you start getting into the positive discrimination line, which is it's definitely a grey area. I've worked in a number of organisations where this has been such a issue, as how, you know, how do we reach 50% female, how do we reach 8% Black heritage? And there's often, you know, you have to have those discussions with your legal department as well, to understand, you know, where that line is, because it can be quite an interesting one. But yeah, certainly from our side, it's very much anyone can apply, but the way we advertise the role and the, you know, the partnerships that we use hopefully get us the percentage of, you know, females, Black heritage, etc. that we're looking for.
That's great. Thank you so much. We've already come to past. So in these last few seconds, everybody, I just want to say that this is not the last you'll be hearing from us. So based on this, we really want to be doing a summer roundtable where we have employers from all sorts of sectors, as well as sizes, to come join us to talk about this further, to see what we can do together to kind of move forward in this space and support employers to be able to do this in the ways that they want to moving forward. So I just want to kind of end there with that. You're going to get some communications from us with regards to this. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much to the colleagues in this group who have also contributed today. And I'm sure Emma will send through post-webinar communication to see how you can access the link to this and watch it back or share with others if you want to as well.
Thanks, RNA. Thank you, everyone. Yes, and we'll be in touch. We didn't get to answer all the questions that we've got in the Q&A tab, but we will be in touch. We will follow up with you all individually. Thank you so much for attending today. Thank you to all our amazing panelists, and thank you, RNA, our host as well. So have a great day. And on behalf of the ISE, we will be joining again in the summer for our roundtable session. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.